Bonjour! Welcome to the newcomers and welcome back for the others. Today, book 6 of Ranger Apprentice, The Siege of Mackindal, Chapter 10. The meal was excellent, consisting of cold roast venison, some plump wood ducks, and a salad of slightly bitter winter grains. There was warm, fresh, crusty bread as well. All in all, it more than lived up to Horace's expectations. He tipped his chair back contentedly and grinned at Will. "Good food," he said. "What's for dessert?" Will rolled his eyes to heaven. Malcolm smiled indulgently. "As a growing boy," he said. He had been impressed by Horace's self-effacing, cheerful demeanor. He gathered that the young man was something of a celebrity in the kingdom, and it was his experience that famous people usually behaved as if the rest of the world should step aside and be impressed by them. Nothing could be farther from the truth with Horace. The young warrior reached across the table and poured himself another mug of black coffee. Like Will, he drank it generously, laced with honey, a habit he had learned from the ranger when they had travelled to Celtica years previously. Malcolm winced slightly as he watched. Pleasant young man or not, if Horace and Will kept drinking coffee at this rate, he was going to run out. He made a mental note to send one of his people to the crackled flagon to trade for more beans. There was a small commotion at the far side of the clearing, and they all looked up. A file of roughly dressed, heavily armed men emerged from the forest, led by a smaller man with a withered right arm held close to his body. As Horace looked at him, he realized that the man had also a hunched right shoulder. The new arrival peered around the clearing uncertainly, shading their eyes from the sudden light after hours in the dimness of the woods. Some of Malcolm's people, alarmed at the sight of a group of armed men, had let out startled cries, then faded away into the forest. The Scandians, in turn, muttered among themselves at the sight of them. Each of Malcolm's followers suffered from some significant form of disfigurement, and the superstitious sea-wolves, who believed all forests were inhabited by spirits and ogres, closed ranks a little, and made sure that weapons were free and ready for use. Unlike the others, Troubadour didn't attempt to hide. Instead, he moved to interpose himself between the new arrivals and his master. At the sight of the giant, the muttering and uncertainty among the Scandians increased. They were all big, burly men, but Troubadour towered over the biggest of them. By now, Will knew that, in spite of his terrifying appearance, Troubadour was at heart a gentle person. Yet he had no doubt the giant would give his life if anyone attempted to harm the man who had taken him and given him a home. The dog, Will noted, had gone with them, sensing Troubadour's concern. Her hackles had risen, and the roof of fur around her throat seemed to be twice its normal size. The young ranger rose hurriedly and stepped forward to prevent any unfortunate misunderstanding. "It's all right, Troubadour," he said quietly. "They're friends." Then, in a louder voice, he called across the clearing, "Gundar Hardstriker, welcome to Healer's Clearing." He came up with the name on the spot, thinking that such an unthreatening name might serve to relax the situation. As he spoke, and the Scandians recognized them, he could see the tension in them drop away a little. Trouble, for his part, stopped his advance across the clearing and stepped to one side. Will went forward to greet the Scandian crew. Horace followed, a space or two behind them. "I take it these are our men?" he said mildly. Will glanced back over his shoulder. "Your men," he amended. "You'll come in them, not me." Horace grinned at him, not taken in for a second by the plow. "I'll come in them," he said, "as long as we do exactly what you tell us to do, right?" He had experience with Ranger and how they operated. They claimed to be nothing more than advisors who stayed in the background. Yet, he knew they were experts at manipulating any situation. He had seen Halt do it with the Scandians 5 years ago. Will's mentor was a master of the art of commanding, while not seeming to. Horace has no doubt that his apprentice had learned the skill as well. Will had the grace to smile at the comment. "Yes, something like that," he admitted. Gundar had stepped forward a few paces as the two Araluans approached. He made the peace sign. "Good past noon, Will Treaty," he said. "This is a strange place you've brought us to." Will nodded. "Strange, Gundar, but not unfriendly. Nobody here wishes you ill." "Unless it's that idiot's secretary," Horace put in an undertone. "Shut up," Will told him in the same tone. Then, speaking more loudly, he said, "Gundar, meet my friend, Sir Horace." Horace and Gundar shook hands, each studying the other, each liking what it saw. Horace was young, Gundar so, but his face bore the sign of experience in combat. The scar and the slightly broken nose. Yet there weren't so many as to suggest that he was continually on the receiving end. Gundar subscribed to the view that a face covered in battle scars usually belonged to a man who didn't know how to duck. Horace, for his part, so typical Scandian. Powerful, fearless, experienced. A man who handled his massive battle axe, with practiced his, and who met your gaze frankly while giving you a handshake that could crack walnuts. With 25 men like this, he thought, he could probably just knock the castle down. "Sir Horace is the commander for the assault?" Gundar asked, and Will nodded. "That's right. Even a small army like ours needs a general, and Horace is trained for the job." Gundar shrugged, content with the arrangement. "That's agreeable," he said. In Gundar's view, a commander was really nothing more than an entrepreneur. He could worry about all the minor points like tactics and strategy. Scandians weren't interested in niceties like that. A commander's chief task, so far as Gundar was concerned, was to supply opportunities for Scandian to hit people. Yet acceptance was not total. Inevitably, there was one Scandian who looked at Horace and saw only his use. In typical Scandian fashion, he wasted no time making his views known. "It may be agreeable to you, Gundar," he said in a loud voice, "but I'm not taking orders from a boy who's still wet behind the ears." Will heard Horace give vent to a small sigh. There were equal amount of exasperation and boredom in the sound. Quietly, Will hid a smile. Horace had plenty of experience in dealing with this particular situation. A less confident man than Horace might have blustered and shouted and attempted to enforce his authority on the Scandian, which, of course, would have been the wrong approach entirely. Scandians placed little value on words. Instead, Horace smiled and stepped forward, gesturing for the Scandian to do likewise. He was a big man, perhaps a few centimeters shorter than Horace, but broader in the shoulder and in the body. Horace noted with interest that he was the bearer of many scars. Horace shared Gander's opinion about such men. His hair was long and gathered in two tarry pigtails, one on either side of his head. His long beard was a tangle of greasy whiskers, and bore visible evidence of his last few meals. He carried a massive battle axe and a large, round, oaken shield that looked more like a wagon wheel than a shield. Perhaps it had begun life that way, Horace thought. The Scandian ignored Horace's smile, keeping his face set in a tight scowl of disapproval as he responded to Horace's gesture and stepped to meet him. "And your name is?" Horace asked mildly. "I'm Nils Roperhander," the man replied in a loud, aggressive voice. "And my life's too important to place it in the hand of a boy." There was no doubt that the last word was intended as an insult. Horace, however, continued to smile. "Of course it is," he said reasonably. "And may I say, that's a lovely hat you have." Like most of the Scandians, Nils Roperhander wore a heavy iron helmet, adorned with two massive horns. As Horace mentioned it and gestured toward it, it was only natural for the Scandian's eye to glare upward. As he did so, he momentarily broke eye contact with Horace, which was what the knight intended. Horace stepped forward, grabbed the horn in each hand, and lifted the helmet clear of his head. Before the man could properly protest, Horace had slammed the unpadded heavy iron headpiece back down, causing Nils' knees to buckle and his eyes to cross. Slightly under the impact, the Scandian staggered for a second, but that was long enough. He felt an iron grip seize hold of his beard, and he was jerked violently forward. Horace stepped forward too, into the off-balance Scandian's path. The heel of his right hand, fingers spread upward, slammed forward into the Scandian's broad nose, making solid contact. At the exact moment that he struck, Horace released his left-handed grip on the bird, so the Scandian was hurled backward, sprawling on his back into the hard ground. One inevitable side effect of a solid blow to the nose, as Horace knew, was to fill the eyes with inevitable tears. As Nils crumbled on the ground, blinded by tears, he heard a slithering sound of metal on leather. Then he felt a strange prickling sensation in his throat. There had been something familiar about that sound. An instinct told him not to move. He froze, and as his vision cleared, he found himself staring up the glittering lens of Horace's sword. Its point held lightly just beneath his chin. Do we need to take this any further? Horace said. The smile had gone. The young man was deadly serious, and Niels knew his situation was a very unhealthy one. Horace moved the sword slightly away from his throat to give him room to answer. The Scandian shook his head and spoke thickly through the blood that was running down the back of his throat from his nose. No further. Good, said Horace. He republished the sword, then held his hand out to Niels, helping the blurry sea-wolf to his feet. The two stood chest to chest for a few seconds, and a look of understanding passed between them. Then Horace slapped the Scandian on the shoulder and turned to his shipmates. I think that settles things, he said. There was a chorus of approval and agreement from the others. They all knew Ropender's propensity to complain and object to any change in routine, and they felt the young knight had handled the situation perfectly. They were impressed by his startling speed, his strength, and his expert grasp of Scandian debating tactics. Scandians invariably preferred a good something to any amount of well-reasoned argument. Horace looked around the bearded, approving faces and grinned at them. Let's see what a bunch of bad bargains have been given as an army. Step closer, he said. Grinning in turn, the Scandians moved around him in half a circle. Horace gestured for them to make room for Will. He's not too big, he said, but he can turn very nastily if he's excluded. The grins widened as they made room for the ranger. Horace, hands on his hips, paced around the circle, frowning as he stood at them. They were a scruffy bunch, he thought, and none too clean. Their hair and beards were overlong and often gathered in rough and greasy plaits, like Niels. There were scars and broken noses and cauliflower ears in abundance, as well as the widest assortment of rough tattoos, most of which looked as if they had been carved into the skin with the point of a dagger, after which dye was rubbed into the cut. There were grinning skulls, snakes, wolf's heads, and strange nose and runes. All of the men were burly and thickest. Most had bellies on them that suggested they might be over-fond of ale. All in all, they were as untidy, rank-smelling, and rough-tongued a bunch of pirates as one could be unlucky enough to run into. Horace turned to Will, and his front faded. They're beautiful, he said. That now is the end of chapter 10. See you next time for chapter 11.